So now we are again in live streaming. Professor Cuomo fixed the technical problem, and so I'm very glad to give him the ground to start the masterclass. Thank you so much.
Yes, I was saying that every relationship between the physical, biological, cultural objects is first and foremost a transduction. It is important to stress, however, that transduction is not an illusory construction, because in transduction, a real object is transformed into an object for another object. And this means two things. The first is that transduction produces a knowledge of the object. The second is that it implies that the transduced object is transformed from a real object, which exists independently of transduction, into a sensual object that appears to another object. The corollary of this double movement is that the real object as such escapes transductive access. Wanting to say the same thing in a simple way, we could take the example of the translation of a poem from one language to another, because we know that the translation is a special kind of a transduction. The translated poem is at the same time the same poem and a different poem. However, translation is not an invention of a pure fantasy, because the translated poem is a transformation of the same poem. In this transformation, something remains the same, something else changes, and often much remains hidden. Now, I would like to go a step further, but narrowing the field of investigation. I think we have realized that what we call perception is a transduction. In the modern philosophical tradition, after Kant, it is said that the human subject perceives reality as it appears to him. Thus, perception is a knowledge of objects, but only as they appear to the knowing subject, because the independent reality of objects remains unknown. In philosophy, however, it is said that the question of perception is more complex than mere knowledge, because every perception is also emotionally connoted, and vice versa can condition the onset of emotions. For example, when I perceive an object, I always do so within an emotional situation. I am happy, sad, angry, frightened, apathetic, and so on. And vice versa, every new perception is capable of producing other emotions in me. Secondly, each perception is also culturally connoted. A classical example is that of two astronomers, one from the Ptolemaic school and the other from the Copernican school, observing the movement of the sun. Obviously, what they perceive is the same movement, but interpreted according to two opposing theories. And it's very likely that these opposing theories also produce different emotional situations in the two individuals. In short, human perception as a transduction is not only an act of knowledge, but also conditions and is conditioned by emotional feeling and cultural imagery. However, the approach I'm proposing on this issue is not anthropocentric. because we cannot at all exclude that the perceptual transductions of animals are also emotionally and even culturally connoted. Nor can we exclude that the transductions made by plants are accompanied by some sort of emotional feeling. Finally, as I have already mentioned, the relationship between non-living objects such as the heart and the wind is also transductions. In short, transductions occur whenever two or more objects come into relationship with each other, regardless of whether these objects belong to the physical, biological, or cultural world. Let us read the following sentence by Jean Youngblood from Expanded Cinema, 1979. He wrote, for some years now, the activity of artists in our society has been trending more toward the function of the ecologist, one who deals with environmental relationships. Ecology is defined as the totality or pattern of relations between organisms and their environment. Thus, the act of creation for the new artist is not so much the invention of new objects, as the revelation of a previously unrecognized relationship between existing phenomena, both physical and metaphysical. So we find that ecology is art in the most fundamental and pragmatic sense, expanding our apprehension of reality. End of quotation. Jean Youngblood was a theorist and historian of visual media, particularly experimental film and video art, and was influenced by theorists such as Marshall McLuhan and Buckminster Fuller, and artists such as John Cage. In this quote, taken from the conclusion of his famous book, Expanded Cinema, he observes and theorizes a paradigm shift in the contemporary artistic experimentation. The new artistic paradigm is an ecological paradigm. Ecology is art in its most rigorous and pragmatic sense. Artistic experimentation no longer consists so much in the invention of new objects, he writes, but consists in the discovery of unknown relationships between existing phenomena, whether physical or not physical, beyond the physical, such as psychic and cultural phenomena. In my opinion, in this discovery of unknown relations between existing phenomena, the issue of transduction is closely linked to that of inspiration. Now, inspiration is a topic that has often been neglected and devalued in 20th century aesthetics, after having been at the center of romantic aesthetics, in Shelley, for example. The main reason for this undervaluation is the creationist paradigm that prevailed from the Renaissance to the modern era. According to this creationist paradigm, there would be two types of artists. On the one hand, the genius creator artist, who creates almost ex nihilo, and on the other hand, the imitator artist, i.e., the artist who imitates the creations of genius. It is as the genius would create original works of art without drawing inspiration from others, while imitator artists would be incapable of creating works of art except by drawing inspiration from the models created by the genius artist. Well, this dichotomy is deeply incorrect. Kant himself, while reiterating the distinction between the work of genius and the art of imitators, does not attribute genius to a single artist, but to nature. In his famous definition of genius, he wrote, "Genius is nature giving rule to art." Thus, even for Kant, genius was nothing more than a kind of a passive capacity for inspiration, a capacity to discover, record, and relate heterogeneous elements of nature, heterogeneous qualities of phenomena. Thus, we could say that the difference between the genius artist and the imitative artist is only a difference of degree and not of nature. The genius artist is the one who can imitate best. In fact, one of the most important characteristics of imitations is precisely the passive capacity to draw inspiration from the natural and cultural environment. To speak of a passive capacity is to indicate a kind of logical contradiction, because the word capacity generally indicates the power to do, indicates an activity, while the word passivity would seem to indicate just the opposite, that is, a being pervaded by the power of others, indicates a suffering of power. Well, inspiration is precisely this paradoxical contradiction in terms, and imitation is first and foremost a process of inspiration. Inspiration is thus an active passivity that consists of a high degree of receptivity to environmental, natural, cultural, historical changes. However, the ability to be receptive always depends on the media through which we perceive the world, because media are transductive machines that are grafted onto our sense organs. Therefore, if inspiration consists of a high receptive capacity, we must always bear in mind that this receptivity is always formatted by the media through which we perceive the environment. If media, as McLuhan wanted, alter the proportions, rhythms, and patterns of our perceptions, then our receptivity is first and foremost conditioned by the media through which we perceive. Media, McLuhan argued, are active metaphors, I would say active transductions. Therefore, to be inspired is to be actively receptive to environments. However, to be inspired, something must move from the outside to the inside of us. Something must move from the world environment to our subjective interiority. To be inspired, we must make continuous transductions, continuous transfers from outside to inside. We know that in transductions, something remains the same and something is transformed. This is why transductions are not fantastic elaborations, but neither are they without emotion and imagination. An entire philosophical tradition, starting with Plato, has devalued artistic inspiration according to three main arguments. The first is this: in poetic inspiration, an essential component is emotional involvement. For this reason, poetic inspiration would be a diseducational and dangerous practice. The second argument is this: poetic inspiration has no cognitive value. The third argument is this: poetic inspiration is a form of divine madness, like possession. In this way, Plato emphasized that the distance between philosophy and science on the one hand and art in general on the other. One of his accusations against imitation and poetic inspiration is that they produce dispersion of soul instead of unity and order. What Plato argued in criticizing poetic inspiration can be positively reaffirmed. Indeed, the value and function of artistic inspiration consists, in my view, precisely in its necessary emotionality, in its cognitive contribution, and in its being a guide in dispersion in the heterogeneity of reality. The ancient Orphic narratives of the poetic descent into Hades and the underworld indicate precisely this. Let us return to Youngblood's quotation, because it seems to characterize poetic inspiration in an ecological sense, in an ecological sense. Through transductive artistic inspiration, it is possible to know the unknown relationship between physical and cultural phenomena. However, such inspiration is still knowledge through the emotions. At the end of the Ion, a work of Plato, Plato, while thinking to devalue the action of the rhapsodist and the poet, gives it paradoxical praise. He writes, "But like Proteus, you transform yourself into 1,000 forms, spinning up and down, until at last, having escaped my grasp, you reappear as leader." End of quotation. If we interpret this sentence of Plato through that of Jean Youngblood, we can say in conclusion that successful artistic transductions are an experimental descent into the unknown in all its forms, but a descent that ends with an ascent that invents new forms from which it is possible to think beyond. That's all. Thank you. Non so se la prima parte.
Thank you so much. Yes, yes, we could catch because you started from the good point. Thank you so much, Vincenzo. It was very, very important. Also, like a connection between the dimension of ecology that we are trying to stress within the project and the artistic dimension in its full accomplishment. So we are, you know, you make us even more aware of this dimension of discovering the unknown relations between the existing phenomena, either internal and external. Thank you so much for giving us this inspiration for the work that we are going to do in Lecce as well. And it's always a pleasure to speak to you and to have really impressive insights about arts and ourselves also as human beings. So thank you very much. I don't know, Fabio, if you wanted to say anything before we stop the live streaming and go to the Zoom for the Q&As.
No, of course, Vincenzo is a presence very important for our research and work, and also, of course, there are a lot of stimulation about what he has developed, and also I'm sure that we will discuss more and more. And I think that the statute of the image, the condition of picture, the using of the technology are some aspects that we have tried to develop in this project, and I think that we will continue the confrontation with Vincenzo. So if there are any questions, of course. And also Vincenzo will be with us 12th of July for the presentation of the material of Cantic Antigone.
So thank you so much, Vincenzo. And Vincenzo has been also so kind to tell us that the text will be available for the internal participants of the project, for the artists and the experts involved in the project. So thanks a lot, Vincenzo. I don't know if you wanted to say something to close this session. Okay, and we go now to the, we close this live streaming. Thank you to everybody who followed us this masterclass, but also all the others along these months of online presentations. And now we are very glad to begin this final creative phase of Antigone's Pride in Lecce, in Italy. Thank you, and see you soon.